Hello and welcome to the Sacred Gates Ascension podcast. My name is Illura. Let's talk about the higher self. There are lots of different names for the higher self. Some people call it the higher self, some call it the divine self, the expanded self, expanded awareness, light consciousness, sentience. It can also be called the higher selves or divine consciousness. Did I say that one already? And it's also your celestial bodies, all of those connections that are coming through your crown that are of a higher vibration. So when we experience our higher self, there's an actual spectrum. And so wherever you are on that spectrum, you're experiencing an aspect of your higher self. So some people are experiencing a much wider spectrum of the higher self integration, and as we grow, we experience branches of the higher self, and then we can kind of block ourselves again or go through another journey. So we're always growing and changing on the higher self path with the goal of actually really getting integrated with our higher self. Now, the higher self is what takes care of the lower self when we're able to embody the higher self-consciousness more and more. And I often relate to the lower self like a little child who's lost in a supermarket, and when the higher self comes in, that little lower self can just relax, is relieved of the position that it can't really handle at that level. And the higher self really comes in almost like a parent, and takes care of the lower self. Now, once the lower self can see that the higher self is higher, is more functional, is more efficient, is more effective, is more capable, then the lower self can relax, and all those crazy, reactive, looping, negative patterns, narratives, and ways of being that are breaking you down and are negative for you and your life, they are able to change and be let go of and transform into something better. And what happens is the lower self, once it realizes the benefit of the higher self, once it's made that logical connection, then it's able to relax as the higher self takes over. And that's that transformation that occurs in your own personal way, in your own life over time. Now, the first sacred gate on your journey to connecting with your higher self is observing yourself. You need to be noticing yourself, observing yourself, and it's what you could call R&D, research and development. Personal spiritual development path, the personal spiritual development path really is a path of R&D, research and development on yourself. So you need to allow your awareness to notice you every day, in and out, what's going on, keeping an eye on yourself. If you don't keep an eye on yourself, you're not going to know what's going on. Your lower self needs to be watching and kind of kicking in through observing to a little bit more of a higher self spectrum there, in order for the lower self to be educated, in order for the lower self to say, hey, this higher self actually is really great, it's really benefiting me. I notice that I feel like this, I notice that I feel like this when I'm observing myself, I notice that I feel like this when my higher self is activated more, when I do these practices, when I take time to be consistent in my practice, all these different things. And now, if we're not aware of ourselves, we're not going to know the benefit. It's not going to be obvious, and those patterns that are already consistent and have a lot of inertia, or albeit negative, are going to dominate. So you really need to pull up your awareness. So imagine that you're at home and you have a dripping sink in your kitchen tap, drip 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 drip, and you're not aware of it. Now all that water is being wasted, and you're not going to call a plumber to come and fix the dripping tap because you're not aware of it. It's only when you become aware of what's going on that you can then get solutions orientated and make the positive change that you need to within your own development. So the first sacred gate is absolute awareness. You have to master being the observer of yourself all the time. And what happens is when you start to become, when you become aware of yourself, you're then able to be aware that you feel so much better. You can't fix stuff, like I said, if you don't observe it. And so you need to be observing yourself continually, making that your focus. If you're finding that you're always going through the same issues over and over again, and you kind of have these bursts of inspiration or these bursts of awareness, and you're like, I know I need to do this, but you then fall back under into the lower self normal operating coping mechanisms that the lower self does to protect you, and it all makes sense, but it's not really functional anymore, then you need, the key is to have awareness to observe yourself. So you have that window into yourself. Now, like I said many times, the mundane is a great environment for observing yourself. So you don't want to just limit your observation and research and develop to when you're sitting and training, sitting and meditating, or when you're doing yoga or whatever your interest is. You want to be continually observing yourself. And what you'll find is when you observe yourself, like I did recently here in another video on the personality and allowing that to be released from suffering, what you notice is when you observe yourself, you suddenly feel a lot more space. Yeah, so you want to allow your awareness to notice those lighter sensations, which is actually your sentience coming through. And so that as you observe and note the lighter sensations in the whole landscape of everything, your day-to-day, in your body, in your interactions with others, then this will keep letting go of the tension of those narratives of the lower self as you allow in more space. In that actual process, you allow the mechanics to affect you positively. And this process of being aware, of noticing, of creating more space through connecting to the lighter frequencies actually educates your lower self, and thus your path starts to become a path, an actual path that you can walk. Because the spiritual path is called a path for a reason. There's a path there for you, for your consciousness to walk on. Thanks for listening. Bye-bye.